Thanks for having me again.
Thank you. So, okay, we're all ready to go now. So, hello to everyone who joins in today. I want to introduce you all to Kristina McMorris. Thanks, Kristina, for joining us. So, Kristina is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and US Today best-selling author of two novellas and five historical novels, her most recent being Sold on a Monday, which I've recently
Yay!
read, and yeah, found it a really, really interesting story. So, looking forward to talking to you a bit more about that. And she's the recipient of more than 20 National Literary Awards. She previously hosted weekly TV shows for Warner Brothers and an ABC affiliate, beginning at age 9 with an Emmy Award winning program, and owned a wedding and event planning company until she had far surpassed her limit of YMCA and chicken dances.
Yes.
Kristina lives in Oregon with her husband and their two sons, aged 15 and 17, going on 40. So thanks, Kristina, very much for joining us. Sounds like you've had an interesting career.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I know I didn't plan on being a writer. As you can tell, I started out in a very different path. So
Yeah.
it's thrilling to be here, though. So nice to talk to you all.
So, would you like to start off maybe by telling us a bit about Sold on a Monday? As I said, I've just recently finished reading it, and I'm really, really interested to know how you heard about the idea and why you decided to write about that.
Absolutely. So my past novels, usually I would write about World War II,
Mm.
I like to say that I completely started the trend. No, that is absolutely not true. But I was writing them, and I wrote my first one inspired by my grandparents' courtship letters
Oh,
from World War
interesting.
II,
Yeah.
and so it was a labor of love, and yeah, just So I was told in many, many rejection letters that World War II will never sell, and so now we all laugh at that, of course, because you
Mm.
can't produce them fast enough. But when it came to Sold on a Monday and the book that I wrote right before it called The Edge of Lost, which was inspired by the fact there were kids who grew up on Alcatraz Island as family of the prison staff right
Oh,
next
wow.
to Alcatraz
Okay.
prison, which of course
Mm.
is so famous for having, terrible, scary prisoners like
Mm.
Machine Gun Kelly and Al Capone.
Mm.
And family of the prison staff would live right next door. And so that inspired that story, which got me into the 1930s. And so I love that era. I felt like it wasn't written about as much as World War II. And now it's so nice to see, friends like Kristen Hanna coming out with The Four Winds, and where
Mm.
the Great Depression is being covered a lot more often now, which is fantastic.
Mm.
And so with Sold on a Monday, I was already interested in the 1930s time period. And I was actually writing The Edge of Lost at the time. So I'm sure I was Googling all kinds of historical, questions. With my thriller author friends, we always joke that don't look at our histories. It looks like we
Mm.
are serial killers. How do you kill someone and have no one know?
Mm.
So I'm sure we're all like, the FBI is watching us.
Yeah.
And so I had Googled a lot about history, and I think that's probably why I get all of those pop-ups. As you recognize, I'm sure, that say, 50 of the most shocking historical photos you have never seen. And you think, what 50 photos have I never seen? Um, so of course I clicked. I should have been writing. I
Mm.
went down the rabbit hole. And what I found was a photograph that, as you well know from the back of the book, a
Mm.
photo that stopped me cold. And that is, there is a picture in the back of the book that has four children that are sitting on their own apartment stoop in Chicago. And the mother is turned away from the camera, seemingly in shame. And there is a
I'll see if
sign.
I can
So
find
yeah, if I'd
the
thought about it, I
picture.
probably would have held it up here. I forget that
I
this book
don't
hasn't
know
necessarily
how
been
well
involved.
people
Thank you.
can
Yes,
see
you
it,
can.
but
Yes, it's perfect. Hopefully you guys can all see that, where it has that sign that says "For Children for Sale, Inquire Within." And as a mom myself, I tried to understand what would push a
mm.
parent to not just give up their children because you thought they'd live a better life without you, but actually because you thought that you wanted to take money in return. And as I researched more about the real children and found an article when they were then adults,
Mm.
couple of them have passed away since then, but there was a follow-up piece that was done about, I want to say 7 years ago now. It was 5 years at the time. And it was about the children, what really happened to them in real life. And they were all given away and or sold.
Oh, so that, yeah.
Heart-wrenching. And I became friends with the oldest girl that's in the little white dress that's in the photo since then. And since you're all on Facebook, if you want to check out my Facebook author page, there is a video that we were on the Today Show together, and it is pinned to the top of the page.
Okay.
And you'll see us tell even more about her story that is heart-wrenching that you won't find in the book. So if you want to check out that, you can hear her tell it in her own words, which is pretty powerful. So that being said, in the article, it said some family members claim the photo was staged.
Oh, okay.
And I thought, if you look at that sign, it is so perfectly painted, almost like someone, had stenciled it and put reflective accent marks. And I couldn't see that mother necessarily creating that, but that didn't change the fact of what happened to these children. And the children were not given away or sold for 2 more years after the photo went, what we called it, a viral, running in 10 different states. People were sending in donations, etc. And I thought, I wonder if one caused the other, or could that happen? And it was a what if question. And really, for me, wanting to explore the effects of our actions as far as the unintended consequences, which I find so fascinating. So in my story, in short, is about a reporter in the 1930s, right in the middle of the Great Depression, that happens across 2 kids on a farmhouse porch in rural Pennsylvania. There's a sign that reads 2 children for sale. He snaps a photo. It's not meant for publication, though, and yet it leads to his big break. And then it has devastating consequences for everyone involved. And there's a question of, is it too late to make things right? And so that is, in essence, the story.
So how much of that is some of the other story? Is it all like fiction, or is there some from the original story in it?
Sure. So there are bits and pieces of the real story, but that's also true with everything I write. All my historical fiction, of course, take bits and pieces of not just one family story, some heart-wrenching stories from all over, really, and then a lot of imagination. And in this case, there were some things, since you've read the book, I won't give any spoilers, but there were some terrible things, where there's a farm involved and how children were treated, and all of that is based on true stories, specifically that family. So, which, since you haven't read the author's note, if people haven't read that yet, you won't know that that in real life, the girl that I became friends with, Rayanne, she was sold for $2 to a farmer and his wife to work on the farm. And the little brother, I think she was 9 at the time, her little brother started crying and didn't want to be separated from his sissy. And so the farmer said, fine, we'll take him for free. So they actually took the money. They spent $2 on these 2 children, and the mother then, Rayanne remembers her mom saying, great, I'm going to use the money to play bingo. Oh, wow. Which is horrific. So in a lot of ways, I think I wanted to have something that is reflective of a situation like that, of desperation, different circumstances, and perhaps, in my view, a better parent, in some way wanting my universe of the kind of parent that I would give to them, that even if the same choices were made, if the reasons were different, would we view it differently? And so in that way, there are bits and pieces of truth in there, but absolutely it is fiction, in that if it were their story, then I would have come at it from a very different perspective and interviewed lots of people and made it a nonfiction piece, which of course it's not.
Yeah. And could you tell us a little bit about how you became a writer? Is it something you'd always thought you'd do, or?
I wish, because I would have been so far ahead of the game. But then maybe I would have realized how crazy I would have been to pursue it as a career and run the other way. So blissful ignorance can be our best friend, as we all can agree, right? That if we had known what we were getting ourselves into at some point in our life, we would have never done it. So sometimes it's better that we don't know. And that is absolutely the case here. So like I said, I was inspired by my grandparents' courtship letters, and when I had created a self-published, and when I say self-published, I mean not today's self-published fancy. It meant going to our store here, which is Kinko's, making photocopies, and doing this spiral binding. It was so fancy. And I created a cookbook then that was just meant to be a Christmas gift for the grandkids, full of her recipes that she had collected and created over decades. I'm sure, a lot of people have these in their families, they pass down. And it was a Christmas gift. And I ended up interviewing her for the biographical section and putting stories about her life that maybe the grandkids had never heard before. And she has amazing stories that she shared. She's 94 years old and she's just amazing. And she lives up in Washington State and still cooks like nobody's business. And so I put all that in and found out that she and my late grandfather had only dated twice during World War II. They exchanged letters the entire time.
Oh, wow.
And then he came home on leave, proposed. They got married, were married for 50 years until he passed away.
Wow.
And I had no idea. We're very close, but, he passed away about 30 years ago. I had no idea that had happened. And then she said, would you like to see the letters? So it seemed like a trick question. Even my mother didn't know she'd kept these beautiful letters in her closet. And she claims it's because nobody ever asked. So we shared these beautiful letters over the afternoon. And when I left her house, I thought, how well can you truly know someone through letters alone? It's kind of the 1940s Match.com. What if you were not completely honest about who you are? And, until in this case, they get married and then you realize, it's great. That would have been information helpful, before we said our vows. So I left her house thinking it'd make a great movie because I was barely a reader at the time. And I don't say that with any amount of pride. I've done an enormous amount of catching up. And so because of that, I decided to go ahead. And when I was pregnant with my second child and high on hormones and I'm creating life, suddenly a book didn't seem that hard. So yes. So I sat down and started writing this novel as like a Cyrano de Bergerac story set during World War II. So it's kind of like the Notebook meets Saving Private Ryan is what I call that. And then since then, I just kept coming across nuggets of history that I think, this is so unique. I had no idea this happened. How come we're not talking about this? How come we weren't taught this in school? So I decided to put it in the form of a novel. And so the second book I wrote was Bridge of Scarlet Leaves. And that was inspired by the fact there were 200 non-Japanese spouses who lived in the Japanese American internment camps voluntarily. They wouldn't be separated from their children and their spouses. It's a story that I hadn't heard before. My dad's from Japan, so I thought, seems like a story I would have heard. And then with The Pieces We Keep, my third novel, which is currently being shopped as a TV series from producers, so you never know, crazier things have happened. And that one was inspired by the fact there were Nazi spies dropped off by U-boat on the east coast of America in 1942. And they had this incredible stranger than fiction story involving the FBI and secret deals that were made with J. Edgar Hoover and a secret military tribunal and betrayals. And you think, I read it thinking, this is a movie. So I ended up converting that into the form of a novel. So that is where I am.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing story. We've got a few people watching, and just reminding people, if you've got any questions, please type them in comments. Kate said it's an incredible story about what you said about your grandparents. That's really incredible. And could you tell me, how hard or easy was it to have that first book published?
Oh gosh. So I call it my first and my 12th novel because of how many drafts I must have done over and over and over again. And again, like I said, it was so stupid looking back, but I wasn't a reader. So I started, I love the art of storytelling always. And I'm half Irish. So we joke that, our jokes and our stories get better every time we tell them. And genetically we have to be storytellers. And so because of that, it was kind of just a new art form in that I've always been a movie buff. And so I hear often that my stories read cinematically. And if that's true for you, then that's very much why, because I see them as a movie in my head and I put the movie down on paper. So as far as how difficult that was, I wrote that first draft thinking it was awesome. And it was like Nicholas Sparks, watch out. It was going to sell for $1 million. We're going to make it into a movie. And that of course did not happen But the first draft is one that is terrible. Nobody should ever have to read it. But my mother thought it was great. So that's all you need to know. So after many, many drafts, many, many rejections, lots of reading, lots of craft learning, lots of going to workshops, a whole pile of rejections that slowly got more complimentary as we went on. So every time I sent out a submission, I would keep working on the manuscript. So if I got a rejection, instead of being depressed, which is very easy to do because it hurts, then I would send out 2 more submissions on the same day. Okay, and then I would just keep working on the manuscript until I thought it's only going to take one yes. So when eventually I got, my agent, and then she sold it over a weekend, I say it was, an overnight success in 2 very long years of querying and rewriting a draft and all of that. So yes, not easy, but learned a lot. And thankfully, none of you had to read that first draft. So I'm glad it did not sell the way it was.
And you said that you weren't much of a reader and that. So did you go out and do courses and to try and learn how you could write better?
I ended up taking workshops at conferences.
Okay.
So that was for the most part what I did. And I'm just reading and learning, and I think that I've always, like I said, I kind of understood the arcs of stories and characters because it's the same in films. And because I grew up in the TV industry and the film industry, I had a pretty good idea of that. And they really do reflect each other very closely. And so yeah, all of the, the goals and the motivations and the conflicts, and that is all very, very similar character development. And so, yeah, a lot of similarities there. So it was a matter of, okay, how do you write this so it doesn't sound like a screenplay?
Yeah.
You have to actually put thoughts in their heads, like you're like, oh, okay, it's important to know what's in their heads. And so a lot of that came from reading, of course, as well. And you think, oh, okay, I understand. This is not a screenplay, and learn how to do it that way.
And Kate's wondering what you enjoy reading, and I'm wondering if maybe there's anything you've been reading lately that you'd like to recommend to us.
Sure, absolutely. Goodness. I read several books recently that I was lucky enough to get an early read. That's one nice thing about being an author, is that we kind of get the early peaks of things, especially in genres that we love to write in, which is always nice. So off the top of my head, there are a couple books that came out recently that are historical fiction that are definitely so wonderful and worth the read. One is called Surviving Savannah, and that is kind of the Titanic of the South story that a lot of people don't know. And that's written by Patty Callahan. So highly recommend that. That just came out I want to say like a month or 2 ago, very, very recent. Another one that just came out too is Stephanie Dray. Is a good friend of mine, and she wrote The Women of Chateau Lafayette. And so it's about this castle and how it goes through 3 different, I think there's actually 4 different wars, but 3 different generations that you're following these strong women that lived in the castle at some point, all tied to Lafayette, with the American Revolution, and the French Revolution and the World Wars. And so fantastic book. And then just came out in paperback, I want to say like 3 days ago, is my good friend Kristen Harmel, who wrote the Book of Lost Names.
Okay.
And that
was
a huge New York Times bestseller, and it just came out in paperback. So great for book clubs and about.
We've actually got that one coming up in our as at one of our monthly book club reads. That one,
good.
So yeah.
Oh, I love it. As you all know, it's female forager during World War II that helped, based on true stories of helping Jewish children then escape the Nazis. So fantastic. And then for a different genre, I will mention one more that I just bought by my friend Mary Kubica, and she's wonderful. I'm sure a lot of you have read her. So her latest one is Local Woman Missing. Okay. And I'm not supposed to be reading anything for fun right now because I'm on a deadline crunch. I'm trying to write the end in two weeks. Oh. But I keep ordering books, and then I just read the first chapter, and you just go, oh, I love a good first chapter. And oh my goodness, this book sucks you in. So can't say enough good things about that one. It's like me, like my reward when I finish writing.
Thanks for those recommendations. Sounds like some good ones to look out for.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and I'll mention one more just because this just came out too. It's my good friend Pam Jenoff, who wrote so many good books like The Commandant's Girl, and you're probably more familiar with like The Orphan's Tale, and the Lost Girls of Paris.
Oh,
so we're
yeah.
huge bestsellers.
Yeah.
She just came out with A Woman with the Blue Star,
Okay.
and that was one I had an early read to. Wonderful, wonderful, like, hidden
Mm,
stories of World War II. So
mm.
there's one more.
Thanks. Kate wonders if there's a top tip you learnt along the way when you were when you were writing and
Oh goodness, top tips.
mm,
Um, you know, there's so funny. I've gone around the country when I was on tour and giving, these kind of talks, especially with the crafter writing to high schools and colleges. And,
mm.
I kind of I have one that's like my top 12. I couldn't even get down to 10. My top 12 tips that I wish I had known from the beginning, and there's just there's ones that you just go, oh, I wish I'd known that before. I
Mm,
think probably my number one tip probably would be, which is I found, so much easier to write with World War II, when you have an inherent suspense element already because it's World War. But that is, that conflict of all things is what turns the pages.
mm,
And I personally always love a good first sentence with and I actually love them with every chapter. So I always strive to raise a question with the first sentence of every chapter,
mm,
that you kind of go, raising the question of that first sentence, but also through the whole book, right? You always want to raise a question that then, and have conflict, that right when you answer the question, you've already have another question. So the reader, has to keep going to think, I want to get to the answer. I want to get to the answer. What happens? What happens?
mm,
Those are probably the ones that I treasure the most. And then I always loved characters, as you know, from Sold on a Monday, that not necessarily have anybody who's just pure evil, or anybody who's just pure good. I like to make them more real. And so because of that, they're all, I like characters that I want to root for. Those are the kind of books that I like to read, is kind of good characters that maybe make bad decisions. But we understand why when you give them sort of their past. And so I do like characters that are likable but flawed. So those are my favorite to write about.
yeah, no, that's good, thanks. Mary's wondering if you have a favorite place and time you like to write.
Oh goodness. When I'm not on deadline, and then I won't write if I'm not on deadline. So that's terrible. It used to be when the world was normal. It used to be when the kids went to school.
Okay.
Was my work hours. It'd be like after they get on the bus, and then it became clear out emails as fast as possible, and then discipline because they're going to be home at 3:30, and that all went out the window this past year. So everybody home, and my husband switched to working from home right before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it was good timing for him, but it became everyone's in my office. Like the whole house is my office. I'm like, oh my God, you're all in my office. Yeah. So it has been weird hours. And I talked to a book club recently that said they had spoken to some other author friends of mine who said the same thing. They said, they've said that their hours completely changed this past year as well.
Yeah.
I think we're all kind of, as everybody is in the world, trying to figure this out. And so because of that, my hours for writing shifted to late at night.
Okay.
It was more like my first book, but never wanting to go back to that. Now that I'm older, you think, that's not as easy anymore. Yeah. So, starting to write very often, wanting to start at noon and not starting till 4, and then writing until 2 in the morning, going, 2, 3 in the morning, getting to bed at 3 or 4. So it is not a schedule I recommend. By my deadline, like 2 more weeks, I'm hoping to start shifting back. But it works because everyone's quiet.
Yeah. Everyone else is sleeping.
Yeah, they're quieter when they sleep.
And are you able to tell us anything about your book you're writing at the moment?
Sure. Oh my goodness. I can't wait. I cannot wait to be done. And I am so excited. It's like my longest book, the most complicated storyline, the most research ever. Yeah. And of course I did the hardest year. So naturally, I'm way past deadline at this point. So we've had to kind of move my deadline. So this is like the 5th deadline I've had or something crazy. My publisher's been so patient. Hopefully, I told them, hopefully you'll all feel it was worth it. Because it'll be really unfortunate if you don't. So yes, what it's called is The Ways We Hide. And it is set during World War II. And I just want to tell you so much. The only thing that I can tell you at the moment, but soon I'll be able to tell you all about it, is that it is set during World War II. always said I wouldn't go back to World War II unless I saw a nugget of history, a story that I had not heard told before. And so if it's out there, in fiction, I don't know about it. And so it's rare enough anyway that I feel like I could get excited about it and share something new. What I will tell you is that it involves a secret branch of British military intelligence that I had never heard of before. And when I shared it with my friend Kate Quinn, who you probably all know with the
yes,
Alice Network, the Rose
we
Code,
spoke to
etc.
Kate Quinn last week, I think it was.
Oh,
Yeah,
great. The
yeah,
Rose Code, which is such a wonderful book too.
yeah,
That's another recommendation. So yeah, so she, I talked to her. We were having brunch together, and I said, "Have you ever heard of this?" And she said, "I have never heard of that before." I thought, okay, because she knows everything about World War II. So I thought, I think I'm onto something. So what I can tell you is they were a very specialized group, very unique. The skill sets that they used and the people they recruited were very unusual. And some of the tactics they used were so successful that they kept them classified until 1985.
Okay, wow.
Because they thought they might have to use them again during the Cold War against the Russians.
Okay.
And the objects they used and even created or altered were things that you all have in your homes. You probably grew up with them and you have no idea they used them the way they did. Okay. So when I came across that, I thought, oh, this is good. This is good. Yeah. This is very fun. So I can't wait to tell you what that is.
Sounds very interesting. And whereabouts is it set?
Oh, good question. Let's see here. So it starts in New York and New York City, and it moves over to London, but outside of London, called Beaconsfield.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it's so I can't say much more about that, but it's an area that they had military intelligence that was kind of out in the country, and then from there it moves into the Netherlands.
Okay.
And so mostly concentrated in Utrecht. Which I had never heard of the city before. Just so beautiful. You think, how have I not heard of the city? It's very similar to an Amsterdam with canals and gorgeous architecture and really fast. So anyway, so it involves my character is the daughter of Dutch immigrants.
Okay.
And that grows up in Copper Country in Michigan, and then where her life takes her is kind of a surprise to her.
Yeah, certainly sounds very interesting. When would we be able to read it, would you think?
Well, if I finish on time, buckle down as soon as we hang up, then it's supposed to come out, I believe, next August.
Okay.
So it'll be kind of an early fall book. Yeah. But I'll have early copies, way before that. And so if people want to follow, my newsletter on my website or Facebook author page and all that, I'm sure I'll be doing giveaways.
Yeah, sounds good. Mary's wondering who inspires your writing.
Who inspires my writing? Goodness. So this is when, you go, just me. I inspire my goodness, no. That'd be sad. Well, a lot of the authors that I just talked about. And Jodi Picoult is one that absolutely inspired me from early on. I remember thinking that, oh my goodness, she could write a grocery list and it would be page turning. And I loved her short chapters. She kind of writes by scenes rather than chapters almost. And I remember thinking, oh, you just think just one more page. So I am truly a fan of, short chapters myself, because that's what I love to read. So that'd be one of them. And then, like I said, some of the authors I just mentioned.
And Mary's wondering if you read your reviews.
Not all of them. I know some authors who are so good and disciplined, and they said they will stay away from them, and then I know others that we try. Most of us try, but it's hard not to, because of course you're curious. But we also are putting out in the world for readers to react to, and you hope you touch them. And but so yes, I do. I not obsessively, but I do peek in. It helps after you read more, I think, when the book first comes out, or it's about to. Every review feels a little more weighted, and then after a while you go, okay, we can move on, because there's lots of reviews and you can now move on to the next book. So even if it was terrible, I'm going to write a better book this time. So a little bit.
Yeah. And your career sounds quite interesting before you're a writer. Is there anything from there that you think you might write about later, or any experiences you've had? And
Oh goodness. So I remember I was a wedding and event planner.
Mm,
So for aside from being a TV show host, I did that for 5 years growing up, from 9 to 14,
mm,
hosting a kid show, and then got out of it. Said I'm in high school. The show was called Popcorn. So
okay.
it's really cool to host a show called Popcorn when you are in grade school.
Mm, mm.
When you hit to high school, you're like, yeah, this isn't so cool anymore. So I decided to retire at the age of 14, the very old age of 14, and then never planned to get back into it. And then I ended up, one thing led to another, and ended up back in the TV industry, back in the film industry, and hosting. Had my wedding in Denver. And then because of that, was asked to host a show for Warner Brothers that had to do with weddings
Okay.
and what the latest trends were and what people were doing and what locations to go to. So I ate a lot of free cake and traveled a lot. They had me do honeymoon videos and everything. So it was really, it was pre-kids. It was very, very fun. Pre-COVID was even more fun. So there's all of that. And so, yeah, I would say that I ended up hosting that show. So yeah, I could, oh my gosh, someday maybe, write about, the kind of TV industry. It's so crazy. I worked at Malibu Gym when I went to Pepperdine University down in California. When I was there in the summers, I would teach super abs class.
Okay.
It's so funny. And there were a lot of celebrities there because it was Malibu. So I got lots of crazy stories there that, someday I'm like, I could do a tell-all book someday. I don't know if that'd be wise, but also the joke in our family for a long time before I was going to be a writer was, I should really write a book someday about all the crazy things I've seen at weddings.
Yeah,
because
I
there
can
were
imagine
14 weddings this summer is what I would coordinate. So you can imagine the stories that we have, that the whole goal was, if things go wrong, just make sure that nobody knows about it, and we fix it as fast as possible, because things always go wrong. And so it was always this joke that, well, we could tell the vendors and I were like, we could really put together a good book.
Yeah. We'll look out for that coming up.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think any brides would be very happy about that one.
No, maybe not. And could you tell me, when you're writing, do you have someone you share your writing with as you're going along?
I do. Oh my goodness. So I talk it through my stories kind of with my husband usually as I'm going, especially if I get stuck on something. He's great about giving input. But the person I share the manuscript with through the whole process is my very good friend named Amy Long. And she was kind enough to, we're very close friends, and she would read, I think she started reading my books to give input, I want to say with The Edge of Lost. And she just kind of gave her free input, and I send her a chapter as I keep writing, and she send me, and we go back and forth. I clean it up and resend it, and I was under a very tight deadline for that book. So it was frantic and crazy, and she was so helpful. And all she got at that point were like acknowledgments, and I think love, and maybe dinner. And since then, I realized how unbelievably valuable she is. So I've recommended her to lots of other authors. She is so, she doesn't have the training, and yet she's so good at what she does, that she helped me complete with Sold on a Monday. And then now she has been, for this last year and a half, she has been amazing and helped me with the new book.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
I can't imagine writing it without her. Yeah, it's great to find that one person.
Yeah, so she's not an author though?
No, she's not. She just she's a huge reader, but she has, how some people, great writers and editors, and people others just have an incredible ability to edit. So she has an inherent ability. She's so naturally gifted that way. She sees, she doesn't just fix the sentence. She'll say, are you sure this character would say it this way compared to how the kind of background or what she said in chapter 2? You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you're thinking through that many levels. It's such a gift.
Yeah, that's great to have a friend like that.
Yeah, yeah. And she makes, and we're close enough, she makes smart ass jokes throughout it, and it's good that I don't get offended by, that I'm like, you better not be writing this to other authors, she's like, oh, no.
Only you.
She likes to insult me as we go.
Yeah.
So.
And can you tell people how they can keep in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, if you go on my website, KristinaMcMorris.com, there you can check out my latest there. There's a newsletter you can sign up for, and I only say I send out a couple a year, but you know what? I'm not even doing that right now. So you will only hear from me when I have some big news and when the book is out and I'm giving away free stuff. So yeah, I can do that. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook are probably the two that I'm the most active on.
Yeah, thanks for that. And thanks so much for joining us. Been great chatting to you. Certainly looking forward to reading more of your books.
Thank you so much. And I will say too, forgot to even mention, I'll make this very brief. I know we're wrapping up, is that my sister and I, she's an amazing artist, has dreamt of illustrating children's books since she was 2 years old. And almost worked for DreamWorks, but then decided to come back to have a family in Oregon. So we ended up pairing up, and so we sold 2 picture books to New York. And our first one is coming. It should be coming up next year. So we're just waiting for the exact date because they're finalizing artwork. But it has been, we're really close.
Yeah, that's great. You've been able to work together on that.
Yeah, that's so much fun. So anyway.
So what age is that?
The ages for the book, I want to say, oh gosh, what did we say? It's kind of age. I want to say it's this usual window, like 3 to 7 is the kind of typical age, or 4 to 8 area. And it's called You Can Do It, Ellie Mae. But there's some really cute twists in the story, and yeah, can't wait to share more. And then I will also say there's another book that I'm working on that I'll share more to, online, but that is that Ariel Lahan and Susan Meisner, who are both amazing historical authors, HarperCollins asked us to pair up.
Together, great.
Yeah. And we're writing a book about set during World War II as well. And
sounds great.
We're working on that this summer.
Yeah. Well, I'd certainly like to talk to you again about your new books when they come out.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that would be great. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone else who joined in today and for the questions people asked. Whoop, my cat's banging my screen.
I want to be part. Thank you, everybody. Thanks
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.